Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Beyond Deadlines podcast, where we tackle challenges that schedule leaders come across on a day-to-day basis. My name is Micah Pipo, and I'm a scheduling manager for Intel.
And my name is Greg Lawton. I'm the CEO of an AI schedule management company called Nodes and Links.
Each podcast is designed to give you strategies and tactics that you can implement right away. Today, we're going to dive into a skill set that most schedulers probably do not have. Greg, you're the VP of scheduling, and you've been asked to present the company's scheduling performance to the CEO and the board. What do you present?
Got it. Okay. I think it's interesting that you said that most planners don't have this skill set. In my experience, the skill set in a technical role that gets you to a senior position, so a junior engineer to a senior one or a junior scheduler to a senior one, is the actual anti-skill set that gets you from senior and beyond, because it's less about technicalities and it's more about politics and explanation. Okay. To answer this, I need to understand, is this a one-off presentation or am I part of the board reporting cycle?
Let's say this is your standard quarterly update, but you have 1 to 2 projects that have gone severely south. They are extremely intrigued on those because they could be massive, red marks on the next income statements and things like that.
Got it. And do they know that things have gone very south and they specifically asked me for this board meeting to focus on those? Or is this a general update when I've been asked to present that we've got an issue to the board?
Let's say this is a general update, but you've gotten word that, hey, Greg, Project A, Project B, we're interested in talking about.
Got it. Okay. So I would fully expect in this situation to have a very, very standardized reporting pack. I would expect to have one, maybe 2 or 3 slides that I can put in beforehand. Those slides beforehand would have to go in at least a week before because the board pack will be printed out and hand delivered to the board members for them to read and review.
Well, let's talk about what would that standard board pack look like?
Well, there's 2 kinds of board packs that I've come across in my time. You've got one that's a free narrative where you've got 2 to 3 slides to say the things that you think are important. And we're talking here very simple words, probably no more than 5 or 10 words per sentence, probably no more than 1 to 3 sentences per slide with some stats, and that's essentially it. Or you've got standardized KPIs that you're reporting on. So, for example, if this is one of the reasons I was asking, is this an exception or a base? I would expect that scheduling for a base update would be singularly on KPIs. So those KPIs I'd expect would be, first of all, around hiring. So how big is our schedule team compared to financial model expectations and baseline? Then there'd be around scheduling competence. So are we at the level of scheduling competence that we need for the organization? And then scheduling deliverables. So this would be around predictability, on-time delivery, change control, and to be honest, only the things that make the company money. Anything else doesn't touch the board. And I'm guessing, is this a client or a contractor or a consultant?
Let's say this is a contractor.
Okay. So the things that primarily make contractors money in the scheduling game is bidding, change, and delay and disruption. So fighting
Now
liquidated damages.
let's keep that going, and let's say what would the difference be when you have a client?
When you have a client, the thing that makes clients money is predictability of performance, because a client is generally buying a large capital asset for the use of that capital asset, and they'll have undertaken the project because the ROI is positive. So there's much more money to be made by getting the thing up and running. So I'll give an example. One of the projects that I analyzed a couple of years ago was actually the putting in place a new oil drilling platform. And they would once up and running, the company in question would make 10 million profit a day based on the oil prices at the time. But the actual placing of the platform required special rigs. Those special rigs were booked out years in advance, and if you slipped past dates, you were either waiting 6 months or a year to get a special rig back, so you're losing that much profit, or you have to pay an extortionate amount of money to reschedule them. So you'd be looking at some very, very high hitting items like that.
Yeah. So let's say you could go into the board meeting, you give your standard update, and you go over your KPIs. I really thought the hiring one was super interesting. I did not see that KPI coming. But you do the standard, and then they want to get into those, let's call it project A, project B, challenging it projects.
Mm-hmm.
What are the differences in presentation techniques, the content, the style, the structure that are going to be different when you're presenting to a board? Or for
Mm-hmm.
those listeners out there, you could picture this as going in to speak to a VP or a CEO or just a higher up level person who's not in the construction world. What are those key differences compared to if you were giving it to a director of construction or a senior construction manager?
Very, very good question. So the first and most obvious one is you start with the conclusion, the end point. A lot of people present a flow of logic. We've been delayed on this. The reason why we've been delayed is we didn't have enough people. To get back on time, we need 10 people. Please, can I have 10 people? No, that is. I've got no time to listen to your first 3 points. It's start with the end one. I need 10 people to get back on time. If I care or I want to, I will ask more questions. But don't force me to listen to all the spiel. Allow me to decide if I want to ask more questions. Because to be honest, I might have more important things in that board meeting to go after. The financial director might have said, we've had 20 million stolen from the bank account. To be honest, I don't really care about your scheduling update this quarter. So that's number one, which is just like start with the absolute end ask in mind. Number two is you have to spend a much greater amount of time on specificity of language and simplicity of language. So you can't have words in there that are loaded terms where different people interpret words in different ways. It has to be the simplest English possible, maximum 3 syllables kinds of English, but very specific to what we're talking to. So, for an example, let's say that there's unpredictability as to where interest rates might go into the future, and the finance director has spent 3 weeks with 5 people on the finance team modeling the treasury and cash flow requirements of the company. They could say, we've spent many weeks modeling, and there's a range of blah, blah, blah. They will say something as simple like, we need to increase our overdraft to 20 million. They'll just make it an absolute and make it a single line like this, and people cannot confuse what that is.
Can you provide an example in construction or for a project?
Yes, for a project, for example, we need to implement double shift working in order to get back on schedule. And then bullet point 2 under that would be double shift working gets us on schedule by September. Third bullet point, we need to suffer a 4-month delay. That's
Now,
it.
would you throw in the costs of either of those? Double shift working is going to cost us 5 mil, but save us 10. We don't do it, we're going to be delayed. It's going to cost us 20. Would you put those sorts of
Depends.
things in there?
It depends on what is the largest blocker. When I was given an example of double shift working, the largest blocker might be HR and unions. So
Hmm.
you focus on the singular problem that's at the top of the pyramid. And then once you've solved that problem, you go to the next problem. Board meetings aren't meetings where, to be honest, a lot of project meetings are like the opposite kind of meetings where everyone chimes in with different comments and thoughts, and they say, have you considered this and have you considered? They're not like that. It is, what is the one problem you're trying to solve? And if there's a second problem, we'll talk about it outside this meeting. It's military, these meetings. So it would be, problem. HR policies and unions don't allow us to do double shift, but double shift will get us back on time. Because
Yeah.
if it's not even a possibility, there's no point of including a cost in there.
Is there a different style or structure that you would use to answer questions that the board might ask you? You mentioned in a construction meeting, it runs very differently. Everyone chimes in, has their own opinion. Have you thought of the solution? Have you not?
Mm-hmm.
When you get a question from the board, would you answer it differently? Or what are some of your tips, tactics, and strategies to give very solid answers?
You'd absolutely answer it differently. In the vast majority of situations, it depends on how you answer your engineering meeting questions. But first and foremost, you need to understand the rules of the meeting from the chairman, because the chairman runs the meeting, and the chairman, might be extreme and permit you 30 seconds per answer, and they literally will just stop talking, and you'll be mid-flow, and it doesn't matter. Stop talking. What you're talking about just isn't as important as all the things we've got, etc. So you need
That's something they might want to think about bringing back to the construction meetings.
maybe, or on the other, like the chairman might allow for an element of creativity, but beat you down to be more specific with your answer. But long and short of it is, you need to understand what the rules of the meeting are, and when you speak and when you do not speak, and how you answer. And the answer will be determined by the chairman. So, for example, if the chairman said, each answer needs to be around 30 seconds long, and you need to be specific and to the point, and any questions or considerations need to be noted in the meeting minutes and taken outside. And you asked me a question at the board meeting, you said, why is double shift a HR issue? I would just, as precisely as I could say, I'd say, first of all, I'd turn to the HR director. Would you like to answer this? And then if they go, no, you answer it, I'll go, wonderful. In my understanding, the agreements we have with unions prohibit us from doing weekend working, so we would require union consent. Shut up. They will then ask another question if they want to.
That pause is always hard to do. Allowing that
Mhm.
space, that awkward silent space, is very hard for people to do. It's something that it's
Mhm.
an art and a skill in just allowing, because usually you're in meetings and if you go back to that standard construction meeting, when you let that pause happen, then every single person gets to chime in the room and people feel more comfortable continuing to talk, continue to explain the idea, continue to go and go and go. And I think that's something that anybody can take to any meeting. There's real power in just keeping it short and simple, unlike what I'm doing now, and then pausing and letting people digest what you said, think about
Mhm.
what you said, because as you keep going, a lot of people, you can talk yourself out of your solution. You can talk yourself out of the convincing argument you just made. Versus if you pause, people get a chance to then reflect and answer back on it. So that's a great point you just made.
So here's a really interesting thing about board meetings. Um, they're mostly silence. And what you just said is completely true. What I find is that people who are not at board level feel the need to express their presence or justify their points or um, defend comments that are put against them. Board members, very established board members, don't feel any of that. They've they're already very successful business people. they don't need to prove themselves, and to be honest, they don't need to defend their decisions. But I don't have to explain myself to you. And because of that, if you make a point, people will want the time to think about it. And if someone starts talking immediately afterwards, you don't get that time, which is actually something where the chairman will actually say, you're not allowed to just start talking. The chairman will say, Micah is recognized. Micah would like to make a point. And then I could say, just give me 30 seconds, please. Because
Hmm.
you're doing your thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's something that in interviews I've always appreciated when people don't fire right back off with a response. Yeah, I asked you a very tough technical scheduling question. Some people just jump right into it and they kind of just end up going all over the place. I've always appreciated when someone sits, takes a moment, thinks about what I said, and then goes in response. Switching gears just a little bit in higher up meetings, it's a bit of cooking the books, as you will. Is there any sort of influence that goes on behind the scenes where board members may have second lieutenants, or maybe you have relationships with them? You want to set the stage with them prior to getting in a room with them. I know on the big corporate side, it's always good if you're going to go present to some directors and some vice presidents. You go meet with their number twos or even them, and you share with them what you're going to share ahead of time, feedback
Mm-hmm.
and inputs on it. So you come in and it's not a big, whoa, I've never seen this before. What's going on? Is there anything like that that happens with board meetings, or is that handled in just the pre discussion? Here's your notes ahead of the meeting, a couple weeks ahead of time, they read through it.
It really depends on the culture of the organization regarding their board meetings. So I've got experience of venture capital, charity, and billion-dollar company board meetings. And from those three, it is none of them it is acceptable to shock someone. Don't like surprises. If you're surprising someone in a board meeting, either you're surprising them very positively or you're moving from the organization. What I'd also say as well is, dependent on the size of the organization, if it's a large one, the board members or the attendees will never be preparing the material themselves. They will have teams that prepare the material. And that's what you're talking about here, where you will want to understand what are the key points being made, what is the focus of the executive. Um, the 48 laws of power that we were talking about before this. An apprentice never outshines the master. So think about, is the point that you're wanting to make the right point for that meeting, or is it a point that you need to make outside of the meeting? Or even more importantly, is it a point that you don't make, someone else makes the point?
Yeah.
So, if I was invited in as a VP of scheduling to give a scheduling brief, I would be expecting that I actually report to the COO or something like that. And I'd be saying to them, do you really want me to do the presentation? Or is it like, surely you should be doing the presentation?
Yeah.
That kind of
That's an
question.
excellent point. Absolutely excellent point. How can you position it, and are you overstepping your bounds? It's going back
Mm-hmm.
to what you originally said at the very beginning. These are all skill sets and talents that aren't in a PMP manual, that you're not going to learn out on the job site, that if you want to elevate your career and keep moving up, you need to be able to pick up. Some of the basic ones are presenting to a group, crafting a presentation, working on your language and the way you structure and say, your simple sentences and your words and your pauses, being able to work at that executive upper board level, to work with people, and
Mm-hmm.
understand the kind of politics that are happening there. Anything else that we're missing or that we may have forgot, or tips on how people can get to that level?
Yeah, I think the two final elements. One is actually a change in the frame of mind. So a lot of people who are junior or kind of mid-seniority in companies mistake what I've just described as politics. Yes, politics, of course, play a part at the top of a company, just like they do anywhere. But what I'm actually describing is rigorous governance. The reason why a specific individual needs to be the one presenting the information and not someone else is because that specific individual has a target on their forehead for that KPI. So, for example, you can only have individuals responsible for KPIs if they have the means of controlling those KPIs. And at the top level, you're relying on the competence of people, not some kind of large-scale enterprise machine to churn out the right answer. Hence why the chairman is so important in the control of the meeting, and why even little things like the chairman saying, "Micah, could you please stop talking now?" You shut up immediately. It's not a personal slight, and it's not a hit at your character. It's military grade precision to the governance of how decisions are being made that can affect the lives of thousands of people. So I'd flip the first thing is I'd flip the frame of reference. It's not politics, it's governance. This is something that people who want to go from senior beyond need to learn, is that governance is a science in itself. The second component is you can start learning and developing these skills right away, taking your presentations and flipping them around so that the number one takeaway or the number one ask is the first thing I read. That's something you can do at a junior level. It's just something that's not really taught for some reason in businesses. And just being incredibly precise and compelling. So I'll give you an example. Some of the board members that I deal with, they will just create a slide, which is a blank white PowerPoint slide, and write 20 words on it and go, "That's my submission." They don't make it pretty. They don't do lots of graphics. They don't do complex diagrams. It is something like, "We need to increase our pricing by 20%. Doing so would net us 10 million more a year. We've modeled all the scenarios and we're confident in this decision." Something as simple as that. And it's like, okay. Like, I've coming back to the main points of get to the point, simplicity and clarity. That is perfectly simple, perfectly clear, and to the point. So it is a perfect board slide. And I think with those two things, people can start developing the skills that can set them apart at the top end of their careers.
Completely agree. This is a skill set that you absolutely have to have. Well, folks, thanks for tuning in this week. We really appreciate all your listens. If you could, please share this podcast with your friends. It would mean the world to us. For us at Beyond Deadlines, we'll see you next week.